Welcome to Cryptoland. I'm Krishna Andavolu. Bitcoin gave rise to a new class of millionaires and billionaires. What does that mean for the future of crypto? This might not come as a surprise, but Bitcoin has made a lot of people very rich. We're more than a decade into Bitcoin's life, and we're here to talk about whether it has lived up to its original promise and how it will shape the future. Here with me are Motherboard's Maxwell, an early Bitcoin adopter and current Chief Strategy Officer of Coinshares, Meltem Demirors. Meltem, Maxwell, thank you for joining me. A lot to talk about, but in order to talk about what Bitcoin is like today and its future, we got to go back in time and talk about how it was born, its history, its culture. Meltem, I imagine it might be a good idea to talk about your life and how you got into Bitcoin, because maybe it tracks to kind of the larger trajectory of where we are today.
Absolutely. I think like many people, when I first heard about Bitcoin, it was 2012, and Bitcoin was deeply ideological in nature and very closely aligned with this idea of crypto anarchism, crypto anarchy. And despite the fact that I grew up overseas, my parents are from a very poor rural part of Turkey, I should be someone who really understands financial exclusion and some of the issues in our current world, in particular in relation to financial violence, which is the most prevalent form of violence in our world today, but I really never thought about it. And when I first interacted with Bitcoin, I was confused by it, a little scared, a little weirded out. But the more I learned about Bitcoin, the more I started to understand that there is no way you can live in this world, look at what's happening in this world, and not be a political person. And Bitcoin is inherently political in its nature. Our aspirations are inherently political. And so when people talk about Bitcoin as an investment, in the early days when I got involved in Bitcoin, it was not about an investment. It was not about making money. It was not about, becoming a millionaire or billionaire. It was really about how do we use technology to subvert the current political, economic, and social climate and to introduce a new thing to the world, similar to what the cypherpunks did in 1992. But we finally had the ability and the technology to give people tools of economic self-sovereignty. And the great experiment we're attempting is the separation of money and state, which hasn't been done in over 3 millennia. Truly, it was a time, and it still is a movement that's very deeply rooted in changing some of the power structures in our world and understanding that money and greed can be a great flywheel to help get these ideas into the popular zeitgeist. And what I think is so interesting is people love to talk about cryptocurrencies as though there's some niche esoteric corner of finance. They are not. This is a $3 trillion asset class that we have memed into existence. It's wild.
Yeah, I'm laughing because it is crazy. Yeah, continue
wild,
now.
But we've done it. And I think what happens from here, we have crypto people who are running for office. We have people in the crypto ecosystem who are pooling their capital together to unseat incumbents and to vote in politicians who are pro-crypto. We have a whole swath of the American population that is focused on a single voting issue, which is what is the stance towards crypto and financial innovation. And I firmly believe that every company in the world will be a crypto company. They just don't know it yet.
So there's a lot to unpack there, and I want to get there. I want to bring you in, Maxwell, too, because I know you've done a lot of reporting in this about wealth, specifically about inequality and these sorts of things, and technology, of course. But Meltem, tell me about your life story, though. You got into it in 2012. How did you hear about it? What was it like? Did you start mining it? Like, how did you accrue a lot of it? Was there a moment where you're like, holy shit, I'm rich now? How did that go? Because I think, I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever sat at a table with someone who's made a ton of money from crypto. I've sat at a table with people who dally in it, maybe have a little bit of holdings, think it's interesting, chat about it. But this is the first time I'm face to face with someone who's like, boom, minted.
I don't know that I would identify myself as boom minted, but okay. For me, so I started interacting with it in 2012. My brother actually had told me about Bitcoin, and it was a really weird experience. At that point in time, Coinbase didn't exist. The only way you really could interact with Bitcoin was through a faucet, which is a website you would go to where people would like stream small amounts of Bitcoin to people to help bootstrap adoption. And then in 2013, I went to grad school at MIT. And at the time, MIT was super active in the Bitcoin space. There was a ton of work happening in Boston. Some of the Bitcoin core developers were located in Boston, notably Gavin Andreessen, who is at Amherst College. And so I started getting more into like the fintech and crypto scene. And prior to that point in my life, like I had worked in corporate America. I was an executive in the oil and gas space, right? I'd never really done something like Bitcoin. I had never really heard of entrepreneurship, never really heard of fintech. And as I was leaving grad school, I was like, well, what am I gonna do with my life? What is actually interesting? Like what will actually make me feel something, right? And I was like, fuck, I'm gonna go work in Bitcoin. There's literally nothing else that I could spend my time on that is even remotely as impactful as Bitcoin. And I met a guy named Barry Silbert who was starting a company tentatively called Digital Currency Group. And the vision was to build the Berkshire Hathaway of Bitcoin, to build a multi-pronged investment firm where we would invest in all of the best Bitcoin companies in the world and then build businesses around Bitcoin, including a media business, an asset management business, a trading business, lending business, so on and so forth. And then I spent the next 3 years of my life just completely immersed in the Bitcoin ecosystem, working with core developers, working with entrepreneurs, working with financial institutions. I mean, I made the rounds in 2015 on the street pitching Bitcoin to banks. And everyone thought we were crazy. Everyone thought we were money launderers. Everyone thought, you know, we're like, oh shit, here's the Bitcoin lady. Don't talk to her, she's weird. And so in a way, the way it feels now, all of the things we thought about and we talked about in those early days when we were all poor and we had nothing. I mean, I had no money, right? I was living in a 300 square foot apartment, working on Bitcoin, and the price of Bitcoin went from $500 to $150. And I was like, fuck, what am I gonna do now?
As in, all your money went away.
Yeah, exactly. Like there was definitely a downturn, and there were definitely a lot of dark times. There were times where I wondered, you know, is this the right thing to be doing? But it was interesting. I have such a vivid memory of the day that Bitcoin hit $10,000 for the first time. It was November 27th, 2017. Or was it? It was a day in November. And we were all gathered in New York because the media company that we ran at the time was hosting the first ever investor-focused crypto event. And I vividly remember I had never owned a nice pair of shoes before. And so the moment that Bitcoin hit $10,000, I went on my little Net-a-Porter app and I bought like a nice pair of shoes for the first time. And I had them portered over to the conference and I put them on and I was like, whoa. And a bunch of us all put in 1.1 Bitcoin each, which is $1,000. And I think it was 100 of us. So we ended up having $100,000 and we threw a crazy party on the rooftop of the Public. And we were all like, what is happening? Why is this happening? Because it happened so fast and so intensely. And I just think there's so many really beautiful bonds and friendships that got created. And now we have the capital. Now we have the resources, not only on an individual level, but as companies. My company manages $7 billion in assets. We're a $1 billion publicly listed company. Other entrepreneurs I've worked with are running multi-billion-dollar protocols. Some of them have $10, $15 billion in their protocol treasuries. And so the conversations we're having now is, what do we do with this capital? We're all politically motivated. We're all ideologically motivated. And I believe that in the next decade, we can mint 1 million billionaires who are like myself and other people in the crypto community who have aspirations to radically alter the arc on which humanity is headed, to move in a more optimistic direction, to move in a technology-focused direction, but also to unlock human creativity in new ways and to enable people around the world to dream bigger, right? Like we've lived in this really weird time over the last 2 years. COVID, I think, has revealed the decay of our institutions and the complete inability of the existing institutions we have to grapple with change. And so there is this beautiful open question of what do we build next? What do we do next? And I think it's incredible that we have a community of people who are leading with technology. The tenets are open source, decentralized, permissionless, and these people are empowered with capital, and they're motivated to build.
So Maxwell, I want to turn to you. As I understand it, the Bitcoin white paper had talked about the financial crisis. There is a certain ideology behind Bitcoin as it comes down to, but then it isn't necessarily always used in that way, right? I mean, originally, people just bought drugs with it on the Silk Web.
There's no doubt that Bitcoin and all of crypto has a very political origin story. You have to remember that when all of these ideas were first coming to the fore, we were in the middle of a financial crisis. I think there was a lot of justifiable anger and frustration with the US government bailing out Wall Street banks, and there was a lot of concern about the Federal Reserve and its role in the money supply. And so, yeah, there was certainly a hugely political undertone to the beginning of crypto. Like you said, I mean, the question is, why do people buy crypto today? Why do people buy Bitcoin today? A lot of people buy it because it's worth X today, and they expect it to be worth X plus 1 tomorrow. And now there are other reasons to buy crypto, definitely. But from what we can see from surveys and things of that nature, the majority of people buy crypto because they think it's an exciting space. They think that it could increase their net worth by a certain percentage, and those are that's a justifiable reason to buy something. I think the question is, how do you combine that with the sort of political elements to get to a sort of more revolutionary, decentralized process like she was speaking about?
I think one of the other reasons people buy crypto, yes, there's a speculative component. But I think one other thing that's been really interesting to observe is for many people, crypto is community. We're living through a really interesting time in human history. The largest religious movement in the world is the spiritual but not religious movement. It has no formal name, it has no identity, it has no structure around it. And I think a lot of people are identifying with crypto as a social community. Like crypto Twitter is super active. There are all of these events and meetups around the world. So I think for a lot of people, crypto is filling an interesting sort of void. People are looking for meaning, and crypto gives them that in a way. And so I do think there's this really interesting shift that's happening where these communities that started online are shifting into physical space. People are talking about building charter cities and citadels and hacker houses and starting to build physical communities.
Yeah, tell me, you were telling me earlier about
the Citadel.
For the most part, you live in New Hampshire, right?
New Hampshire,
Tell me
correct.
about what it's like up there and how, you're building a little crypto community.
When we think about the investment in crypto, the other thing we have to remember is for many people, it is an antidote to chaos that you can buy in your portfolio. It is a hedge against infinite money printing, against trillions of dollars of bailouts, the government incompetence that we're seeing around the world. For many people, they've never had the ability to exit, right? They've only had the ability to voice their dissent. But for the first time with Bitcoin, people who are unhappy with the monetary regime they're in had the ability to exit into something else, to put their assets into Bitcoin. So I think that's very interesting. Like in this exit versus voice discussion, we used to only have voice. Now we actually have the ability to exit the system as well and build a new system. And we have the Bitcoin ecosystem and have developed completely outside of the existing financial system for 7 years and became a multi-trillion-dollar asset class before Wall Street ever touched it. And I think that's never happened.
But the reason it became a multi-trillion-dollar asset class, as you said, is because you memed it into existence. Basically, you convinced a whole bunch of other people to buy it so that the price went up.
Sure.
And now y'all rich. Cool. But my question would be these are great sounding ideological motives. But when the rubber hits the road on it, is it just now another asset class that goes up and down in value, that it's going to be part of people's portfolios?
And I think what's happening, right, across people's portfolios, people are looking at the world, right? Why did everyone become an investor during the pandemic?
Time.
Retail participation in capital markets is at an all-time high. Why?
Because people are at home.
People are at home.
There's a lot of money in the money supply.
There's a lot of money out there, but also people are looking at the world. You could go work, right, for $15 an hour,
Yeah.
or you could day trade. There's a whole community of TikTokers out there who are day traders and fund their nomadic lifestyle day trading. I think what's interesting, and again, I'm a millennial, I'm 35 years old, right? I could have spent the rest of my life working and still be paying grad school debt. The only opportunity I had to make it was through something that had asymmetrical risk reward. And that was, for me, crypto. And I think a lot of people looking at this see the opportunity for asymmetrical risk and reward. And so whether that's sustainable, like there's an argument to be had there. Will there be a lot of volatility? Yes. Will it become less volatile over time? Very likely, yes. But I think right now, a lot of people are looking at crypto and they want to be involved. They want to participate, and they have the ability to. For the first time, this is an asset class that every person can participate in, regardless of how sophisticated they are, regardless of who they know, regardless of what platforms they can access. It's open to anyone and everyone, which I think is, again, beautiful. And the information is out there for free on the internet.
Help me understand how all of that makes total sense. I think people who don't come from a lot of money, they feel a need to take on risky propositions in order to improve their life. What I don't quite understand is how those set of incentives are any different from someone who got into house flipping in 2003 or someone who bought shares of Apple in 1995. What is it about crypto that is distinct from those type of risks earlier?
And here's the interesting part, or maybe the challenging part. There is no CEO of Bitcoin. There is no singular leader. There is no singular investment thesis on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is interesting because people see whatever they want to see in Bitcoin. So there's a whole group of people out there who are focused on technical analysis and trading, and they're really into the speculative element. There's a whole group of people out there who view Bitcoin as like the next coming of God and are religious about it. And they're all of these different niche sub-communities. But the beauty is Bitcoin is flexible enough to accommodate all of these different sub-communities, and some of them evolve and spin out and become their own thing. But I don't think there is like one singular view or singular perspective or one singular ethos. And the beauty is, again, like we get to decide what it is we want to build and want to create. That's the beauty of something that's permissionless in nature.
Can I ask a question? Because you know more about this than I do. I know a lot of people own a little bit of crypto, but my understanding is that crypto, for the most part, is highly concentrated. The vast majority is owned by a very small number of people. And is that right? Is that wrong? And if it is true that it's concentrated amongst a small number of people, how is that a democratizing force? How is that different from, how assets are divided through Wall Street or anything like that?
This is a great question, and one I love talking about. So in our existing monetary system, wealth is extremely concentrated.
No doubt.
In the crypto ecosystem, one of the challenges is how do you distribute wealth as the value in these networks grow? And one of the interesting things, and there's a ton of great data produced by a company called Glassnode that tracks on-chain data and analytics. And actually, Bitcoin ownership and Bitcoin wealth concentration has gotten more distributed over time. And today, whales control about 12% of the Bitcoin supply. But what's really cool
Whales being
people who own more than 1,000 Bitcoin.
Okay, so that's 12% with the whales.
With the whales. Exchanges, right, which typically use only a small handful of wallets, control about 30% of the Bitcoin. Miners have a significant amount of Bitcoin as well, but they've been selling their Bitcoin as well to cover operations and periods where Bitcoin prices decline. But then the really cool thing is there's an extremely long tail of smaller Bitcoin holders, and that long tail keeps growing. And one of the things that's been really cool is there are now a number of companies like Fold and Lolly and others where you don't need to buy Bitcoin. They actually give you Bitcoin for doing normal everyday things. So Fold is a company that every time you spend money, right, you swipe your card, gives you Bitcoin cash back. So they're building a Bitcoin cash back API effectively. And so one of the things we're thinking about really actively is how do we solve this problem and get Bitcoin into people's hands where they don't need to buy it. They don't need to spend, $65,000 for Bitcoin.
Right.
That's very scary and like not accessible for most people. But how do we give people small amounts of Bitcoin for doing normal everyday things? And so as that continues to grow, what starts to happen is that long tail of holders starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. There are hundreds of millions of wallets out there, and there are a ton of great analytics that we can track because everything on chain is publicly visible and viewable and analyzable. And so our objective really is to start to flatten that curve. So instead of having this chunky sort of distribution where you have a lot of Bitcoin concentrated on one end of the spectrum, how do we start to even it out and create this really massive long tail of people who own small amounts of Bitcoin, but as Bitcoin becomes increasingly valuable, that provides them with more resources to, do what they want to do. So that long tail is growing, but we need to find more ways to help it grow.
So what are we doing? What are you guys doing to make sure that wealth actually does benefit a large swath of people?
I think one of the biggest ways that I've focused on giving back is I spend all my money investing in entrepreneurs, startups, people who are building new ideas, new things, new institutions, new political organizations.
How does it work with taxes and Bitcoin? And how do you think it should work? How should it be
So,
spent?
and yeah, exactly. And the reason I think this is an important question is because we live in a society, right? And our governments
in a society.
Yeah, our governments might be broken, but there's a lot of attention these days paid to whether billionaires or people who've made a lot of money are paying their fair share into broader-based programs that are decided through democratic means as to how we have better roads or how we move to a greener economy, these sorts of things. So if you want to keep everything within the crypto world and you never cash out, then when are you ever going to pay taxes? And when
You pay taxes. You pay taxes on like-kind exchanges. So if I trade my Bitcoin for another cryptocurrency, that's a taxable event, just like it would be if I bought Google shares to buy Apple shares, right?
Cool.
We're not creating new tax rules, right? The tax rules are the same. And again, when you're interacting with a traditional platform like a Coinbase or a regulated financial institution, you're getting issued a tax form at the end of the year that summarizes your activity, and that's being reported to the IRS.
And you pay on that dividend as well? So you pay just like any other stock?
It's just like any other normal asset class, any accountant and there are a bunch of crypto tax platforms where you can plug in your wallet addresses and they'll do all the calculations for you. So it's just like any other asset class. There are some interesting new approaches, though. One of the approaches that's being taken in Europe in some countries is anything that happens within the crypto space is untaxed, but when it touches the fiat system, you pay capital gains. So that's one way of approaching it, where it's like, okay, there's all of these things happening on chain, but what we want to tax is the endpoints, which is when this actually enters the fiat economy. One approach. A lot of people are also relocating to jurisdictions where there are no taxes. A lot of people have migrated to Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
I myself do not live in Puerto Rico because I don't mind paying taxes, and
it's part of the libertarian ideal or roots of the concept of cryptocurrency too, which is I don't want to pay taxes, or I want to be able to give what I want to give to who I want to give it to.
I think the issue is if we look at how taxpayer resources in America have been spent on waging endless war.
Broken. Agree.
Yes,
Totally
destroying countries.
But also
to defend
Medicare,
the dollar.
Social Security, public school.
Of course. But if we look at what we get for the amount of tax we pay, and what we get, I grew up in Europe, right? Tax rates in Europe are only marginally higher than those in the US, yet they have free education through university, right? They have public health care. They have free childcare. In America, we have none of those things. You can pay a really high tax rate. Your children will still be saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt to go to university.
Sure.
That's fundamentally broken. The healthcare system has been privatized. In America, what we do is we take public resources and we put them in the hands of private companies. Tesla, billions of dollars of tax subsidies. The oil and gas industry, $20 trillion, very mature industry, receives billions every year in direct tax subsidies. So I think the issue we have here is there is so much grift with public sector resources flowing into the hands of private corporations.
So if I totally hear what you're saying.
That's what I take issue with. That's where the inequality stems from, is that we don't live in a democracy. We live in a corporation state.
Mm-hmm.
So if our tax structure looked more like Europe with nationalized healthcare and lower defense spending and things like that, how would that affect your view on how taxes should be employed in the U.S.?
I mean, look, the only thing I can say is we can sit here and we can pontificate, and that's great, and we can complain. But if there's one thing I've learned from 7 years of being in this industry is at some point you just have to shut the fuck up and build it. And so I am going to help put people in office. We need to create a new political party. I don't think the two-party system in America works. And I think we're now at a point in the crypto ecosystem where we have enough resources, we have enough wealth, and we have enough people who view the world through the same lens that we can actually start to enact real change. And it's not us sitting here around this table talking, it's us putting people in office who are going to change things. But a geriatric, white man dictating what happens to a woman's body is not the world I want to live in.
Very fair.
So I think we're going to see a whole new class of politicians emerging, and hopefully a new political party emerging that has radically different ideals and radically different perspectives on how America can continue to be a place where innovation happens, where we defend freedom and the right to privacy and the right to choice. And that's always been like the foundation of America. And I think I'm an American immigrant and I love America, but the America we live in today is not the promise that we all, I think, see. And again, I think what's great about the crypto space is you have a group of people who want to build this future.
But is building that future to the detriment of the problems of today? Which is to say, like, is enough wealth being created to propose real solutions to the problems at hand? Because here, I'll take your point,
sure.
like, and I say this a lot, and I think it's true, is the world of crypto and blockchain today isn't going to be the world in 20 or 30 years, right? Same way the internet was 20 or 30 years ago.
The only constant is change, right? Entropy is like the moving force.
So are we actually planting the flags in the ground and building the foundation that will actually lead to a more equitable and democratic crypto world in the future? Or are we just, new Zuckerbergs, new Bezos, new whomevers that are going to cash out and be even more powerful in the future? Because there's nothing to say necessarily that won't be the case. And so it is up to you and your class of folks who've made a bunch of money and are now building that infrastructure to make sure that doesn't happen. So tell me about that, because I think that's an easy, open question.
Yeah.
And it's one that I imagine you're thinking about a lot. Because good faith, I can put that on the table. You're not here just to not pay taxes. You're not here just to make a bunch of money. You believe in this thing, and that's cool.
But none of this works, right, if it doesn't spread, right? So one of the interesting things about crypto, right?
Wait, why not? Yeah, why doesn't it work?
Okay, because these are what we're building, right? So a blockchain, like, it doesn't have a CEO, it doesn't have a company. It is an organic, like, living, breathing, evolving organism that requires participation. And when you don't have participation in these networks, they stagnate and they die, right? And so one of the really important things is, like, for this to work, we have to get as many people on board as possible, and we have to get people moving in a similar direction. And what I think is really powerful and really interesting is people are already starting to do that. We've been doing that since my earliest days in the Bitcoin ecosystem. I would be on IRC talking with pseudonymous people, don't know who they are, and we'd be discussing IRL things we're going to build and do together to try to push this vision forward. And again, I think one of the really important things here is, like, this is a volunteer-driven community. 100% volunteer-driven. And you can build a company, you can build a business, you can build a protocol, you can make money. But there are millions of people around the world who participate in this industry, who create narratives, who tell stories, who create mythology, who build these communities, who aren't motivated by the money aspect, but they're motivated by what we can do if we work together. So again, it's very important, I think, for so many of us in this space to not just build for us.
They're not motivated by the money aspect? Because that's what comes as surprising to me, because it seems like it is money. And the whole idea is that it's money that is new and that creates people who have new money. What confuses me is, isn't this just greed being good? Aren't we just replaying the same thing with a new technology?
I mean, how would you like us to rebuild the world without any capital? Money is power. I can't change that. You can't change that. That is, like, the earliest lesson I learned in my life is money is power. And in order to have a voice, to have a seat at the table, you need to have money.
But But I'd like to come back again, though, to sort of the early days versus today.
Yeah.
In very material ways, let's talk about it. Because like, how much actual wealth has been created through Bitcoin? Like, when it started in, 2009, it was worth almost nothing or nothing, right? How, like, if I were to hold all of the dollars created, like, how many dollars would that be?
Yeah, so just basic facts. Today, Bitcoin is a $1.2 trillion asset class. It fluctuates, right? Like today, Bitcoin is, I think, $60,000. We had a sell-off. We had some liquidations in the options market last night. So we went from 65,000 to 60,000. So it's around like $1.2 to $1.5 trillion economy. Bitcoin is anywhere between 40 to 50% of the overall crypto asset market. Ethereum is the second largest asset. That's around, 700, 800 billion. So pretty material. And then the other thing that's really interesting, it's no longer just crypto assets themselves. There are also publicly listed companies like my firm, over $100 billion of market cap in publicly listed crypto companies that are pure play crypto companies. And then there are companies who have some component of their revenue coming from crypto, like Square or Robinhood, that also have many hundreds of billions of dollars more of market value. And again, when we look at let's put assets on a relative scale, right? Crypto, $3 trillion market. Precious metals, literal fucking rocks, $12 trillion market. Okay. Global equities, $100 trillion market. Real estate, $300 trillion market. And this is why context is so important. And what I do is I bring receipts, right? I think it's very important to help people contextualize. But if we look at just growth in the equities market, right? The equities market in the United States in the last 18 months since the start of the COVID pandemic has more than doubled in size. There is $5 trillion of capital sitting on the sidelines right now in cash. Where is that capital going to go? Google is a $3 trillion company. Apple is a $2 trillion company. Microsoft is a $2 trillion company, right? There are 4 stocks on the S&P 500 that make up 25% of the market cap of the entire US stock market. And they're multi-trillion-dollar companies. They have budgets that are bigger than the budgets of nation states.
Right, so the general solution...
So like, just if you take a step back, right, like crypto is not the craziest thing that's happening. We're living in this interesting world where corporations, right, have more power than nation states. They have more resources than nation states, which is a dynamic we haven't seen before and is the result of there is so much money in the system. So crypto is the least surprising thing to me, and it's so blatantly obvious if you put it in context.
I agree with all of the problems you've stated today, including inequality, too much defense spending, issues with the healthcare system. What I just have trouble wrapping my head around is why crypto is the answer to any of those things. Like, what makes it so different, or what about the decentralized technology? I've never been able to understand how that helps solve things outside of it being another market or something. Like it's you were saying, anyway, so.
It's just an alternative, right?
Yeah, we agree about all the problems in the world. I just I have a difficult time figuring out why crypto is the answer. So how does it solve some of those issues?
I mean, it's
other than money is power. Other than like, let's get a lot of money so we can try to change things, because we're a community who believes in good things.
But the one thing you have to remember is, right, like we can't print more Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a fixed supply schedule. Bitcoin as a protocol has settlement guarantees that you don't have in the traditional banking system. And they enable peer-to-peer settlement without an intermediary.
Right.
But I think, again, there's a great Satoshi quote, and I'm going to use it because like the gospel of Satoshi is real. And it's, if you don't understand, I don't have time to explain. So I do think there's an interesting thing. I spent the last 7 years of my life trying to explain and convince various people from all walks of life about the significance of Bitcoin. And again, there are many different reasons why people find Bitcoin appealing. There are many different attributes of what's being built in the crypto space that are potentially a part of the solution to some of these deep-rooted systemic issues. But at the end of the day, none of them taken alone are a panacea. And again, like money is just a shared delusion, right? Like money is just a collective fiction. I'm trying to convince you of my view, my delusion, right? But it's very difficult for me to convince you of my delusion because you're trapped in your own delusion, which is
I'm not trapped. I'm not trapped. And it could be that the benefit of crypto is that it moves resources from this traditional hierarchy of white men who work at Goldman Sachs to a totally different group of people. And that might be fine. I think that would be a good thing to have a more diversified.
I think the most powerful thing that Bitcoin has done, and the most dangerous thing that Bitcoin has done, has helped people understand that they have a choice.
Here's what actually scares me is that you're so much smarter than me when it comes to money. Like I can just, this is like obvious, right? And you're at the forefront of this new industry that is creating a lot of value. And this feels to me just like another time where a bunch of super smart people have a new toy that they're gonna run me over with. And they're telling me that it's gonna make everything better, but like, I don't know.
I don't know that it's gonna make everything better. All I know is that for the first time, people who have never had choices have a choice. And choice is incredibly powerful.
The Winklevoss twins, like they don't have choices? Like there's a lot of people who had a lot of choices who were early in on this, who knew it because of their privilege, who are now super rich because of their privilege. So like,
I can't change how like markets work today, right?
But it's just
as you articulated, we live in a society. Like you're asking me to solve all of society's ills and to completely
I'm not.
Shift the power structure of society. Like we're not in that place. But I think of all of the things I've looked at, right, of all of the things I've spent time on, this is the thing that actually has the potential to start to shift some of these things. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. There are a lot of flawed people in Bitcoin. There are people who have motivations that don't align with mine. There's probably a part of me that's also not altruistically motivated, right? Like all humans are inherently selfish. That's who we are. But I also do think that giving people a choice, giving people who haven't had choices before a choice is really powerful, and forcing a conversation, right? Like crypto is forcing a very real conversation on a geopolitical stage at the uppermost echelons of power about systemic threats and systemic inequality and imbalances. And that conversation even happening was unconscionable 10 years ago.
I would counter that and say that the conversation often happening around crypto and blockchain technologies is all the weird and sometimes stupid shit that people are doing with all the money.
A lot of dumb stuff.
And whether that's like trying to buy the Constitution or buy a copy of the Constitution, or sort of like oddly and beguiling inflated prices on NFTs that like don't really mean anything. Like these are thought experiments.
Art doesn't mean anything?
Well, this is an interesting question that we can get into, but like what I mean to say is
I would beg to, like the artists I'm buying NFTs for are people who've never had money before, who are now making money on their art. They're super excited.
Well, I mean, money, like since the Medicis, like making a bunch of money has always meant being a patron of the arts. So there's nothing wrong with it, and it does mean something. But what I mean to say is like, it can read to a lot of people just like, oh, here's new money with new money doing dumb shit like money does. So like that's, I guess it's like, yes, there's the social movement, which is interesting, but there's also, I think, what ends up being what people talk about, which is like a lot of young kids doing interesting shit with new money.
Okay, but here's just the one caveat I want to add. Again, what you're articulating is the exact value proposition of something that's permissionless in nature, because no one can tell anyone what they can or can't do. If people want to build dumb shit, that's their prerogative. Like, we can't have it both ways. We can't build a permissionless, open financial network and then dictate what people can or can't build. So one of the things that I struggle with, but you have to sort of get comfortable with, is if we're going to preach for permissionless financial innovation and open permissionless financial networks, we also have to be open to the fact that there are people who are very different from us, who have very different objectives, who are going to use this technology for their own goals. And they may not align with mine, but we can't have it both ways. We can't let a small part of this community dictate, the overall direction. And again, like, technology is just a tool. It's humans who use tools.
I think what is hard for this conversation is we don't know exactly how many people who got really rich off of crypto by being there early have let's change the world in a super positive way at heart. We don't know people's motives, and we don't know the actual dispersion of people's motives.
But that's the beauty of self-sovereignty and agency, is we get to decide.
So Maxwell, I want to talk to you for a second, because there's a lot of big ideas, and in your reporting on inequality in tech, as it specifically relates to this subject, but also as this subject, crypto, is a manifestation of larger concepts and what technology does to society. Like, what are the red flags that you see coming out of this conversation? You know, what makes you want to push back the most?
Tell me about my red flags.
Yeah.
I'm dying.
You were just talking about, spending, money on ludicrous things. That to me doesn't seem like an issue, to be honest. Like, rich people have been spending money on stupid stuff for thousands of years. I think, but or maybe millions, who knows?
They were trading wampum for like sick cave art.
Yeah, exactly.
So, NFTs, whatever you think about them, some people think they're innovation, some people think that they're, going to be gone. I don't know, I don't really care. I think I don't know if there is a red flag, but I do find myself still confused about outside of Bitcoin rising in price, Bitcoin allowing people back in the day to buy nefarious drugs. I'm just having a trouble seeing how it's solving any of these problems. And obviously people think that it does, because like you said, there's a religious element to it, there's a real devotion to it. And early adopters, I think, understandably, really feel attached to crypto, because especially in the case of Bitcoin, it's changed a lot of people's lives. And if you were there early, but for people—
It's also our family. Like, my family, my friend group, that's where we built this thing together.
So you love it. Yeah.
The collective experience and what we've been through, it's really beautiful.
I mean, and I think that's incredible. I think it's great to have money going to anyone who didn't have it before. But if we're starting today, though, if you're starting to get into, you want to buy Bitcoin today, I wonder, do you think you'll be, are you too late to the party, or are you still very early?
You don't have to buy Bitcoin, though. You can earn Bitcoin. You can get paid Bitcoin cashback rewards. Like, what we want to start to do is create new dynamics where you don't have to buy
Sure.
Because it's too expensive now, so you have to give it away to make the base.
But you can buy $5 of Bitcoin. You can buy $10 of Bitcoin.
Let's go back to the community, because I think what we're talking about is what the newly minted millionaires and billionaires of the Bitcoin community are doing. Because the fact is, there's a lot of them. The fact is, they're rather wealthy now. And the decisions that community makes as to what they do with that wealth could and might determine how the future of this culture, this subculture going mainstream, turns out. So, like, take me through some of that. And I think this is something to also keep in mind too, which is part of the confusion, Maxwell, that I share with you, is that the value proposition of what Bitcoin specifically isn't that clear. It can be talked about in like 10 different ways, but unlike, say, the ultimate driving machine, like a product like BMW or something, like, it doesn't have a singular reason to exist.
It's 13 years old, right? Like, if you ask people when cars first came out, if you asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? Like, we don't know yet. And I think that ambiguity that's something we grapple with, and it's evolving and changing, but it's up to us collectively to decide what it will be and to shape it and give it direction. Like, there is no magical entity out there who's gonna decide what happens. Like, it's us collectively.
So how has that changed then over the years? How has what collectively you guys have decided that this thing should be changed?
Yeah. I mean, I'll be very candid. One thing I've been really disappointed by is a lot of early Bitcoiners have taken a step back. They have taken their wealth, and I'm not astronomically wealthy by any means. Like, I'm comfortable, but I'm not a Bitcoin billionaire, right? Like, I was broke when I got into Bitcoin. So by no means, a Winklevoss twin. But I think
you're a C-suite executive and like a $200 million cap. So you're doing great.
Doing great. Like, but I think, again, there are a lot of people who've made a lot of money, and a lot of them have chosen to take a step back, right? For a number of different reasons. And I think, again, for me, it's always been, I am out here investing in things, empowering entrepreneurs to build things that I think are interesting, worthwhile experiments. I don't know if they're going to work, but if not us, then who, right? I want to try. Now I'm working on like DAOs and new ways of organizing capital and allocating it to artists, like artists who are doing one-of-one art and have never had capital before. Like my friend Justin Aversano, amazing photographer. He's raising 1,000 Ether right now, which is $5 million, to fund 1,000 new photographers, right? And that's super cool. But again, these are experiments. So I'm trying to figure out how we empower more people to just build things, bring them into existence. But also we need to get politically active. So we're getting politically organized. We're unseating incumbents. We're electing new people. We're working on potentially new political party. We want to create new institutions, right? So how do we build new societal institutions that embody some of these concepts of being decentralized, that leverage open source software where people can take these building blocks and use them in their smaller local communities and shape them and use them in ways that they want to. How do we build physical communities around crypto, right? So we're now working on like hacker houses and meetups and in-person sort of community around all of this. There are all of these different little pockets that different people are working on. And so for me, the most fun part has been like, how do we continue to push this forward? How do we continue to move this in a direction where people can actually interact with crypto outside of like trading it or buying it? And how do we get people together online and in physical space to talk about what they want to build and then empower them with resources to just like build it? Let's go try it.
Yeah.
If not us, then who? Like, let's try it. Why not?
Because there was that famous story of the guy who bought the 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. That made sense to me. Like you have some Bitcoin, you use it similar to the way people use Venmo today or PayPal or something like that. And now it feels like, do people use Bitcoin like in a way that is different substantially from the way that they might use a dollar? Like I invest $1 in my friend's company. People, have been doing that for a long time. Yeah. How are people using Bitcoin in a way that is different from that? Is it that people are able to send money from Australia to New Zealand without dealing with that? Yeah,
I'll give you an example. Yeah. So today, I can send on my phone, say $1 from here to anyone in the world with a public wallet address. I don't need to know who they are. The only thing I need is 36-character string of letters and numbers. That's their wallet address. And I can send them as little as $1, 1 cent even, over Lightning Network. And the fee will be 1/1000th of a cent.
Lower banking fees.
Yeah, and effectively no fees. And there are different blockchain protocols that are enabling even lower fees and even faster transaction times. But again, I think it's like we can now enable people, and there's actually a really cool company called Stackwork that allows, it's like an Upwork or a Fiverr where people can get paid in Bitcoin. So if you're a developer, right? So for example, if you are a university educated woman in Afghanistan, you can no longer work outside your home. Right. If you have an internet connection, you can work online and get paid in Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to deposit in a bank account because as a woman, you can't have a bank account.
Right.
So you can now empower people around the world to work for Bitcoin, which is pretty cool.
That is a tangible benefit. How big is that? How often is that happening right now?
All the time. And there are huge developer communities in Argentina, in Chile, in Venezuela, in Turkey, where I'm from, in the Philippines, in Malaysia, in parts of the world, right, that have sort of been cut off or where there isn't as much economic opportunity. There are tons of people who are like working on crypto projects. There are anons. There are people who don't have known identities who work in the crypto space and are getting paid in crypto, right? So like you can work entirely in crypto and be anon. You can have many different identities. So I think this idea of the metaverse, which has always existed, right? It's just the internet, like it's always been there. But now we've added these new economic tools to it that don't require us to use a credit card, that don't require us to have an identity, right? To use the banking system, to use Venmo, you need a bank account. To have a bank account, you need an identity. 25% of the world's population doesn't have a government-issued identity. So we can now allow people, anyone with a phone and an internet connection can get Bitcoin. And I think that's super powerful. You and I don't feel that pain because we live in America and we have bank accounts and we've never been marginalized or excluded. But I think for people who haven't had those opportunities, like this is tremendously exciting for them.
I think that is a super exciting opportunity. You have to agree with
the question,
that.
yes, of course. But then the question is it happening? Or we're in like a incubator development stage, which is 1,000 points of light across the crypto world, trying to develop these things. Are they going to cash out into something that actually works, or, are we just giving the upside to something that's making a lot of people a lot of money? Which there's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, it's just another way of making money and moving it around. And yes, no bank fees. That sounds great, but will this tide actually lift all boats? And I think that's the inequality question in a nutshell.
And here's my answer to that. Like, I can't decide that for anyone,
Nor
right?
can I,
because
right.
value is deeply subjective and deeply personal. And we're still super early. Like, the technology to be able to do these things is like 3 years old. Some of it's being built right now, and it takes time, right? Like, the arc of time is very long.
Mm-hmm.
What I do know is when I started 7 years ago, people didn't get it. And what we were doing was 1/1000th of the size it is now. And what I feel now, like when I travel around the world and I meet people or talk to people on the internet, is this technology is changing people's lives. It's getting people excited. It's motivating people to build things they've never built before. It's getting people and organizations and governments to think about the world in new ways. Like, the government of El Salvador has issued every citizen a Bitcoin wallet and gave them $30 of Bitcoin when Bitcoin was $40,000. So we have a whole economy that's been onboarded to Bitcoin. What happens with that? That future is up to people to build and decide. This is permissionless financial technology. So people will build different things, and some of it will make sense to us, some of it won't. Some of it will be altruistic and well-intentioned in nature, some of it won't. Mm-hmm. But my only job is to empower people to build the things they want to build and to try to move the movement forward in a way that's positive and value creative. And that's all I can do, mm-hmm. right? It's up to people.
We don't know the end of this story,
no.
But we do know that financial innovation has been maybe the best thing that's happened to the human race, which is to say the kind of value, like I would be a subsistence farmer right now were it not for that.
That's how my parents started life.
But we also know that financial innovation can cause gigantic crashes. Like in 2000, when it's not regulated in ways that benefit everyone.
But this isn't zero sum, right?
No, it's not zero sum.
It's
so
not.
We don't know the ending to this story, but we know what's happening. We know what happened in 2009 till now, and the culture that's been created is bifurcated in a way.
Sure.
It is altruistic, it is cool, it is new tech, and it's also a bunch of rich jackasses doing dumb shit, which is life, which is humanity.
We can't dictate what people do or don't do.
But we can judge them.
We can judge them. But again, the beauty of this is, like, it's here. People are going to build what they want to build. It is just a tool. It is not the only tool. But what people are choosing to do with Bitcoin is incredible. It's beautiful. The stories are amazing. And I'm just excited for that to continue to grow and grow. And let's keep dumping fuel on the fire and let's see what happens.